Anyone can find almost anything about anyone online right now for free, without hacking, without breaking a single law. That's not a threat. That's just how public information works in 2026. And in the next few minutes, you're going to learn exactly how it's done. That's OSINT, open source intelligence. And no, it's not something only detectives or government analysts get to use anymore. The tools are free, they're public, and anyone with an internet connection can run them today. Think about the moments this actually matters. A strange message from a number you don't recognize, a new follower whose profile looks a little too polished with almost no history behind it. Meeting someone from an app, hiring a freelancer you found online, renting from a landlord you've never met in person. In every one of these moments, the same question shows up. Who actually is this person? And can I trust what they're telling me? That single question is the entire reason open source intelligence exists, and it's the reason this topic has exploded heading into 2026. People used to think investigation work belonged only to detectives, journalists, or government analysts sitting behind 6 monitors in a dark room. That's not true anymore. The tools, the techniques, and the mindset behind OSINT have become available to absolutely anyone, and that shift is exactly what we're going to unpack now. Let's start with the basics, because the term gets thrown around a lot without anyone actually explaining what it means. OSINT stands for open source intelligence. The open source part doesn't mean hacking, breaking into private accounts, or doing anything illegal. It specifically means using information that is already publicly accessible, information anyone could technically find if they knew exactly where to look and had enough patience to look for it. That includes things like public social media posts, old forum comments, archived versions of websites, business registries, court records, leaked data that has already been exposed online, cached pages, image metadata, and much more. The internet holds an almost unbelievable amount of information about people, companies, and events, and most of it just sits there, scattered, disconnected, and forgotten. OSINT is the practice of gathering those scattered fragments and turning them into something coherent, something you can actually use to answer a real question. Here's the part most beginners get wrong, and it's worth saying clearly right at the start. Good OSINT work isn't about collecting as much data as physically possible. It's not a contest to see how many screenshots you can take or how many tabs you can have open at once. A pile of screenshots is not intelligence. A short, accurate conclusion backed up by solid evidence is intelligence. The professionals in this space will tell you the same thing over and over again. Define your objective first, figure out what question you're actually trying to answer, and only then start collecting information that's relevant to that specific question. Skip that step, and you end up with mountains of noise and absolutely no clarity, which defeats the entire purpose. So what does a real OSINT workflow actually look like? It generally follows a structured pattern. First, you define the objective, meaning you get crystal clear on exactly what you're trying to find out. Are you trying to verify someone's identity? Are you checking if a business is legitimate? Are you trying to figure out if a photo has been used before under a different name? Second, you identify your sources, meaning you figure out where this kind of information is most likely to live. Third, you collect the data methodically rather than randomly clicking around. Fourth, you analyze and correlate what you found, looking for patterns, matches, and contradictions. And fifth, you document your evidence properly so that your conclusion is something you can actually explain and back up later, not just a gut feeling. The structure is what separates a real investigation from someone just doom scrolling through a stranger's Instagram for 20 minutes. Now let's get into where people actually start when they're trying to find information about someone. The very first stop, for almost everyone, is a search engine. But here's the thing, most people barely scratch the surface of what a search engine can actually do. Regular searching just types in a name and scrolls through the first page of results. Real OSINT work uses something called search operators, sometimes referred to as advanced search techniques, to dig past the surface web and pull up content that isn't sitting there in plain sight. These are special commands and symbols you can add to a search query to filter results with incredible precision. Things like searching only within a specific website, searching for an exact phrase, excluding certain words, or searching for specific file types like PDFs or spreadsheets that might have been left publicly indexed by accident. This single skill alone puts you miles ahead of someone just typing a name into the search bar and hoping for the best. From there, the next major pillar is what's often called SOCMINT, which is short for social media intelligence. Social platforms are, without question, one of the richest sources of information about a person that exists anywhere online. People reveal an enormous amount about themselves without even realizing it, through the photos they post, the locations they check into, the people they interact with, the opinions they share, and even the small details in the background of a picture, like a street sign, a distinctive building, or a reflection in a window. Investigators use dedicated tools to search and correlate information across the major platforms at once, rather than manually jumping between Instagram, Facebook, X, Reddit, and Telegram one at a time. These tools help build what's sometimes called a network map. showing how a person connects to other people, groups, and locations, which can reveal a much fuller picture than any single profile could on its own. One of the most powerful and honestly kind of fascinating techniques in this whole field is username correlation. Here's the concept behind it, and it's simpler than it sounds. Most people are creatures of habit, and that habit extends to the internet. When someone creates an account somewhere, they tend to reuse the same username, or a very close variation of it, across dozens of different platforms, because it's easier to remember and it becomes part of their online identity. There are tools built specifically around this idea, and they work by taking a single username and checking it against hundreds of different websites and platforms simultaneously. Everything from major social networks down to niche gaming forums and code repositories. If someone uses a particular handle on one platform, there's a real chance that same handle, or something close to it, shows up somewhere else entirely, on a site they forgot even existed, revealing accounts they never meant to connect to their main identity. This is exactly how a seemingly small, forgotten detail from years ago can end up being the thread that ties an entire digital footprint together. Email addresses work in a similar way, but they open up a slightly different set of doors. An email address isn't just a way to send messages, it's often used as the login for dozens of other services, and that creates a trail. There are tools designed to verify whether an email address is real and active, check what platforms it might be associated with, and importantly, check whether that email has ever shown up in a known data breach. Data breaches happen constantly, and when a company gets hacked, the exposed information, things like emails, usernames, and sometimes even passwords, often ends up circulating publicly or semi-publicly. Breach checking tools let you search across these exposed records to see if a particular email or phone number has ever been compromised. This isn't just useful for digging into someone else's history, it's actually one of the most practical things a person can do for themselves too, simply to find out if their own information has been exposed somewhere without their knowledge. Reverse image search deserves its own moment here, because it might be one of the single most underused tools by everyday people, despite being incredibly powerful. Think about how often a photo is the very first and sometimes only piece of information you have about someone, especially with dating profiles, online sellers, or new contacts reaching out on social media. A reverse image search lets you take that photo and search the internet to see everywhere else it has appeared. This can reveal a genuinely surprising amount. Maybe the photo actually belongs to someone else entirely, a model, an influencer, or a completely unrelated stranger, which is one of the clearest red flags of a fake profile. Maybe the same picture shows up attached to a different name on a different platform, which suggests an alias. Or maybe the photo is legitimate, and this confirms consistency, which is reassuring in its own way. Either result gives you real information you didn't have before, and it takes only a few seconds to run. Now, beyond the individual pieces, there's a bigger and honestly more important skill that ties this entire field together, and it's called entity resolution. This is the process of figuring out whether a bunch of scattered clues actually belong to the same person, rather than jumping to conclusions too quickly. A photo on one platform, a reused username on another, an email that shows up in an old breach, a bio line that matches almost word for word, a location tag that lines up with another post from months earlier. None of these individually are proof of anything. A shared name could easily be a coincidence. Plenty of people share the same name. A similar username could be a completely unrelated person who just happened to pick something similar. But when several of these small pieces line up together consistently across multiple independent sources, that's when you start building real confidence that you're looking at the same person. This is the actual skill that separates a careful investigator from someone who just Googles a name once, sees a matching result, and assumes it's correct without checking anything further. Jumping to conclusions too fast is one of the most common and most dangerous mistakes in this entire field, because it can lead you to make a wrong assumption about a completely innocent person. Let's talk about some of the specific categories of tools that professionals rely on, because understanding the categories matters more than memorizing a giant list of individual websites, since tools come and go, but the categories stay fairly consistent. There are directory and framework tools, which act like a giant organized map of hundreds of other OSINT resources sorted by category. So instead of trying to remember dozens of individual websites, you can start at one central hub and get pointed toward exactly the right kind of tool for whatever you're trying to find, whether that's an email, a phone number, a domain name, or a social media profile. There are aggregation and automation platforms, which can take a single starting point, like a domain name or a username, and automatically scan across dozens or even hundreds of public data sources at once, pulling together everything from technical records to mentions on obscure forums, saving what would otherwise be hours of manual searching. There are link analysis platforms, which take all the scattered data points you've collected and turn them into a visual map, showing how people, organizations, and pieces of information connect to one another, which is incredibly useful once an investigation gets complicated and you're trying to keep track of a lot of moving pieces at once. And there are specialized lookup tools built around one specific type of data, like phone numbers, business registrations, or property records, which tend to be narrower in scope but extremely precise within their lane. It's worth mentioning that this entire field has grown into a genuinely massive industry, and it's still growing fast. The demand for these kinds of tools and skills has expanded well beyond cybersecurity teams and government agencies. Journalists use these techniques to verify sources and confirm facts before publishing a story. Businesses use them to check out potential partners, verify vendors, and protect their brand from fraud. Everyday people use them to verify who they're talking to online, whether that's before a first date, before sending money to someone they met on a marketplace app, or before trusting a new contact who reached out asking for something personal. And there's a growing trend worth understanding as this field continues to evolve, which is a shift away from just collecting as much raw data as possible and toward doing careful, thoughtful correlation instead. The old approach was scrape everything you can find. The smarter, more modern approach is verify that these fragments actually belong to the same person, rather than fooling yourself into a false conclusion because you found something that looked close enough. Now, here's something genuinely important to understand, and skipping past it would leave a big gap in the picture. Just because information is technically public and technically accessible doesn't automatically mean using it is appropriate in every situation. There's a meaningful difference between verifying that a stranger on a dating app is who they claim to be, checking if a business you're about to work with has a legitimate track record, or confirming your own digital footprint isn't exposing more about you than you realized, versus using these same techniques to obsessively track, monitor, or harass a specific individual without their knowledge or consent. The tools themselves are neutral, they don't have intentions, but how they get used absolutely matters. And there are real laws in many places around stalking, harassment, and privacy that apply regardless of whether the information involved was technically public. Responsible use of these skills means having a clear, legitimate reason for what you're doing, being honest with yourself about your actual purpose, and stopping the moment your curiosity crosses over into something that could genuinely harm another person's safety or peace of mind. This isn't a boring disclaimer tacked onto the end of a video for legal reasons. It's actually central to using these skills well, because the professionals who do this work seriously all operate under this same principle. The goal is verification and protection, not surveillance for its own sake. Let's bring this back to something practical and genuinely useful, which is running the same process on yourself. This might honestly be the single most valuable use of everything covered here, and it's something almost nobody thinks to do. Take your own name, your own usual usernames, your own email addresses, and run them through the same kind of process described above. Search your name and see what actually comes up on the first few pages. Run a reverse image search on your main profile picture and see everywhere it shows up. Check whether any of your emails have appeared in a known data breach. You might be surprised, and not always in a good way, by how much information about you is sitting out there, connected, searchable, and available to literally anyone who takes 20 minutes to look. Old forum posts you forgot existed. An old username tied to personal details you'd rather not have connected to your current identity. A photo indexed on a site you never gave permission to use it. This kind of self-audit is one of the most practical, immediately useful applications of everything in this field, and it puts you back in control of your own digital footprint instead of just hoping nobody ever bothers to look. So where does someone actually start if all of this feels like a lot at once? The honest answer is you don't need to learn everything on day one. Start with the basics. Get comfortable with advanced search operators on a regular search engine, because that single skill alone will improve almost everything else you do. Then move on to running a reverse image search the next time a profile picture feels even slightly off. Then try a username check the next time you're suspicious about who you're actually talking to. Build the habit slowly, one piece at a time, rather than trying to become an expert overnight. And always come back to that first principle mentioned earlier. Define your objective before you start collecting anything. Know exactly what question you're trying to answer. That single habit will keep you focused, keep your search efficient, and keep you from falling into hours of aimless scrolling that leads nowhere useful. Let's slow down for a moment and go a little deeper into a few of these areas, because each one deserves more than just a passing mention. And understanding the why behind each technique makes the how stick a lot better in your memory. Take search operators again, because this is genuinely the foundation everything else gets built on top of. When you type a name into a regular search bar, the engine is doing its best to guess what you probably want, and it prioritizes popular, recent, heavily linked pages. That's great if you're looking for a restaurant recommendation, but it's terrible if you're trying to find a specific, obscure mention of a person buried somewhere on page 11 of the results. Learning to wrap a phrase in quotation marks forces the engine to look for that exact sequence of words rather than a loose approximation. Learning to exclude certain terms lets you filter out noise, like a common name that keeps returning results for a celebrity who shares it. Learning to restrict a search to a single website lets you dig only through, say, a specific forum or a specific news outlet, rather than the entire internet at once. And learning to search for specific file types can occasionally surface documents, spreadsheets, or presentations that were technically published online but never meant to be easily discoverable. Things like old resumes, internal company documents, or public records that got indexed by accident. None of this requires any technical background or coding knowledge. It's just knowing the right vocabulary to speak to a search engine, and it is, without exaggeration, the single highest value skill in this entire field, because it applies to literally every other step that comes after it. Now, let's go a little further into social media intelligence, because there's more nuance here than just look at their profile. A public profile is only the surface layer. The real depth comes from looking at patterns over time rather than a single snapshot. When did the account get created? How often does it post? And has that frequency changed suddenly? Who does it interact with most? And are those accounts also fresh, thin, or suspicious looking? Are the photos consistent in style and quality over months and years? Or does the account suddenly change tone, location, or even apparent age at some point? Investigators pay close attention to these kinds of shifts because a sudden change often signals something worth understanding better, whether that's an account being sold or handed off to a different person, a fake profile being freshly built to look established, or simply someone going through a major life change. None of this requires anything invasive. It just requires actually reading through a timeline carefully instead of glancing at a profile picture and a bio for 3 seconds and moving on. Metadata is another area that deserves its own moment because most people have genuinely never heard of it, yet it quietly shapes an enormous amount of digital evidence. Every photo taken on a modern phone or camera can carry hidden data embedded inside the file itself, sometimes including the exact date and time it was taken, the device used, and in some cases, even GPS coordinates showing precisely where it was captured. Most social platforms strip this out automatically before upload, but plenty of photos still get shared directly through messaging apps or email, where that hidden data remains completely intact. Checking a file's metadata, when available, can confirm or contradict a claim someone has made about where or when a photo was taken, which is a surprisingly powerful piece of verification on its own. Public records make up another huge and often overlooked pillar of this whole field. Depending on where you are, there are entire categories of information that governments and institutions make publicly available by design, not because of any leak or breach, but simply as a matter of public record. Business registrations, for instance, often show who officially owns or operates a company, which becomes extremely useful when trying to verify whether a business is legitimate before working with it. Court records, in many places, are public by default and can reveal a genuine, documented history that someone might prefer to keep hidden. Property records can confirm ownership or connect a person to an address. None of this involves hacking or unauthorized access of any kind. It's simply information that institutions have already made openly available, sitting there for anyone who knows to look for it. Archived web pages deserve a mention too, because the internet has a much longer memory than most people realize, and that memory can be incredibly revealing. Web pages get deleted, edited, or taken down constantly, but that doesn't necessarily mean the content is gone forever. Web archiving services regularly take snapshots of pages across the internet and store them permanently, which means a deleted blog post, an old version of a company's website, or a profile page exactly as it looked years ago can often still be pulled up and reviewed, even long after the original was changed or removed entirely. This becomes especially useful when someone has clearly gone back and edited their own history, deleting old posts or rewriting a bio, because the archived version can show exactly what used to be there before the edit happened. It's also worth talking honestly about the limits of all of this, because no method here is perfect. Names can be extremely common, so a match is never proof on its own, only a starting point that needs further confirmation. Usernames can be recycled by different people over the years, especially on older platforms where handles occasionally free up again. Photos can be stolen and repurposed to build a fake identity, so a consistent-looking photo history isn't automatic proof of authenticity either. Even breach data isn't perfectly reliable, since breaches sometimes contain old or fabricated entries mixed in with legitimate ones. This is exactly why the entity resolution principle mentioned earlier matters so much. No single piece of evidence should ever be treated as the final answer. It's the pattern across multiple independent sources lining up consistently that builds real confidence, and even then, a careful investigator stays open to being wrong. There's also a psychological side to this that rarely gets talked about but genuinely matters. It's surprisingly easy to start looking specifically for what you expect or want to find, rather than staying neutral and following the evidence wherever it leads. Good practice means checking yourself, asking whether you'd reach the same conclusion with no prior assumption going in, and being just as willing to conclude someone is exactly who they claim to be as you are willing to conclude the opposite. That kind of honest, disciplined thinking is really the difference between doing this well and doing it badly, far more than knowing any particular tool or website. Bringing it all together now, this is a skill set that keeps growing in relevance every single year, not because people have suddenly become more suspicious of each other, but because more and more of daily life happens through screens, through strangers, through profiles and messages and listings that used to be handled face to face. Verifying who you're actually dealing with online isn't paranoia. It's just a reasonable modern version of the same instincts people have always used to protect themselves, updated for a world where a huge amount of trust now gets built entirely through a screen before two people ever meet in person. The internet holds an enormous, sprawling amount of information about almost everyone and everything. But raw information sitting scattered across 1,000 different corners of the web isn't the same thing as actual knowledge. The real skill, the one worth genuinely developing, is learning how to find the right fragments, connect them carefully and responsibly, and turn scattered public data into a clear, honest, and useful answer to the question you actually started with. That's the real difference between someone who just Googles a name and gives up and someone who actually knows how to find the truth, patiently, carefully, and responsibly, one verified piece at a time.